Hi, everybody. Today is Thursday, September 18th, 2025, and our friend Alex Krainer is back with us. Welcome back, Alex.
Thank you for having me, Nima. Always good to join you, and warm greetings to all your listeners and viewers.
Alex, actually, today I wanted to start with the case of Ukraine and then the Middle East. But what has happened in just 5, 6 hours ago is was Netanyahu coming out with a new video talking about Charlie Kirk. And it's so bizarre when you look at the behavior of Netanyahu in the aftermath of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And he tweeted a lot, he talked a lot, he said over and over that Israel wasn't do anything in that direction to we didn't want to assassinate him. He was the one of the best supporters of Israel. And here is what he said just hours ago.
Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, said that the bigger the lie, the faster it will spread. Well, somebody has fabricated a monstrous big lie that Israel had something to do with Charlie Kirk's horrific murder. This is insane. It is false. It is outrageous. Charlie Kirk was a giant, a once-in-a-century talent who defended freedom, defended America, defended our common Judeo-Christian civilization. Charlie loved Israel. He loved the Jewish people. He told me so in a letter that he sent me just a few months ago. One of my greatest joys as a Christian, he said, is advocating for Israel and forming alliances with Jews to protect Judeo-Christian civilization. He encouraged me to make the case directly to the American people about how vital Israel is to U.S. national security. He told me, the Holy Land is so important to my life, it pains me to see support for Israel slip away. Now, if Charlie disagreed with a policy of mine or a decision here and there, not only did I not mind, I welcomed it. This is the essence of Charlie. This is the essence of a free country. It's exactly what Charlie stood for. And I knew that his suggestions always came from the heart, from his love for Israel and from his love for the Jewish people. A few weeks before his death, I spoke to Charlie. I invited him to visit Israel again. And sadly, that won't happen. Now some are peddling these disgusting rumors, perhaps out of obsession, perhaps with Qatari funding. What I do know is this: Charlie Kirk was a great man, and a great man deserves honor, not lies. Rest in peace, Charlie Kirk. May your memory be a blessing.
Yeah. Actually, we had Tucker Carlson coming out and he said he didn't like Netanyahu. And how can you understand the behavior of Netanyahu and his administration? He tries every time he comes out and he says that he loved Israel and all of these sort of rhetorics on his part, but he doesn't talk about himself. Because I think what Charles Kirk was talking about Netanyahu and his administration and these people who are running the show in Israel.
I have to say, I never followed Charlie Kirk very much. He did come to my attention. I listened a little bit, and I rapidly lost interest because I guess I caught him while he was advocating for Israel, and I can't quite get advocating for a genocidal nation, which is committing genocide in front of everybody. But this is obviously a much, much bigger case, and for some reason, it's making Netanyahu very, very nervous. And so he's coming out with all these statements and all these tweets. And before there was even a suspect, he started to say, oh, it wasn't us. It wasn't us. And he tried to frame it as it was the Islamists. He tried to insinuate that it was the Islamists, trying to direct the anger at the wrong target. And in doing all this, Netanyahu is only making the case that he did, in fact, have something to do with it, or the state of Israel, or pro-Israeli groups in the United States, or Israeli intelligence, or all of the above. that they are actually the culprits. And even if they're not culprits, because there's no conclusive evidence for that, if you were an investigator and you just came out of police academy, it's very obvious that Israel will be at the very top of the list of your suspects to investigate. And then by talking more and more and more about it, Benjamin Netanyahu is only making himself look more and more guilty. And in these cases, the truth might come out much, much later. It might never come out. Like, we still debate who killed JFK and RFK and MLK and so forth. But what's more important than evidence and conclusion of the case is what people actually believe. So it's the court of public opinion that at this stage matters more than any future court case that might determine the guilt of anybody, which probably won't happen. We might even get the patsy. The patsy might be put to death, as we had with so many of these high-profile assassinations, so that the officialdom can always say, "Oh, we solved the case. That guy's gone. He was a very bad person, and now everybody can go home and live happily ever after." But I think that in the court of public opinion, Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel are losing. And, if they had a friend, somebody who could tell them, when you're digging yourself deeper and deeper into a hole, just stop digging. And it's not difficult for anybody to believe that Israel was behind it, because Israel obviously made a reputation for assassinating anybody that that they perceive as a threat to them. And Netanyahu built a reputation for being a compulsive, pathological, consummate liar. And so obviously, if he's saying black, a lot of people out there assume, oh, it's got to be white then.
Yeah. To understand what is happening in the United States with the movement that Charlie Kirk has started, it seems is much bigger in the mind of those people who are closer to Netanyahu. That's why they're doing everything. I don't know if you heard, Ben Shapiro taking over the movement. He's talking about funding it and helping it. And here is what he said on Charlie Kirk show.
Daily Wire, we trust you at TPUSA to do it. I mean, that's really the answer. We're willing to provide, and we are providing, any level of material support, any level of support on the ground, boots on the ground, helping you to do what Charlie would have wanted to be done here. And I think that the reason that everybody trusted Charlie, the reason we're all mourning Charlie, is because nobody did it better. You spelled out two of Charlie's goals. You said, he wanted to bring people back to Christ and bring people back to church and back to biblical values. And he wanted to keep the MAGA coalition together.
And expand it.
And the question is how you do that. And the answer is you focus on the first, and the second is a byproduct. Okay, the answer is that, as Matt says, you have to unite around something. And yeah, we can unite in the short term around the fact that there are a bunch of people who hate our guts and want to murder us.
The key point is the bunch of people are hating us and want to murder us. And I think he's pushing for the rhetoric of Netanyahu. Netanyahu says these people all want to kill us. They're taking over the movement. Who's there? I don't see anybody. I don't see Candace Owens there. I don't see Tucker Carlson there. But these people are taking over the movement that Charlie Kirk has started, and they think that they would empower their sort of ideology through that movement.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to work because, Ben Shapiro might think highly of himself, and he clearly enjoys hearing himself talk. And he does have a certain talent, he's very eloquent. But whatever comes out of his mouth is very unconvincing. He thinks he's very convincing, but obviously he's no Charlie Kirk. And I think that this would be, let me see, if you wanted to take AC/DC, the rock band, and you removed Malcolm Young and you put in some other guitarists there, it's not the same thing anymore. You can call it AC/DC, but I guarantee you that everybody would lose interest. It's not, that's not the same thing. And so, they want to preserve the movement as it was intended, but I doubt that it will be it will work. But then also notice something very important in what Ben Shapiro said, that he's actually describing the battle that they just lost, because he's saying, oh, we have to preserve and keep this movement together, and then the other thing is the byproduct. Well, you just lost that movement. So that also explains their sudden jumping on the moral high grounds and pretending that they all loved Charlie Kirk in order to make themselves the new and improved authorities with the new and improved charisma to take this same movement and lead it in the direction that they want.
And you look at the videos, most of the videos of Charlie Kirk, you don't see these people around on the table. You see these people on the table, but usually he's the main character. He's the main player of show, and nobody knows the other people around him, And on campus and everywhere he went, he was alone, and he was talking just his sort of mindset, his sort of ideology, his sort of policy. That's why I think you're right. They're not going to change. They're not going to be able to take over the movement. It was basically based on his personal qualities during the talks with the students, even within the MAGA movement. And
right.
Alex, what's going on in the aftermath of the assassination is somehow there is an official rhetoric that says he was assassinated by radical left, which we've learned. J.D. Vance yesterday said again, that radical left, these people hate us because of our sort of political views, and it's not that simple to go in that direction. Here is what Tucker Carlson said, and I think that he's responding to somehow this sort of mindset on the part of J.D. Vance and these people who are trying to picture the assassination as a radical left, I don't know, whatever that would be, assassination.
You hope that Charlie Kirk's death won't be used by a group we now call bad actors to create a society that was the opposite of the one he worked to build. You hope that. You hope that a year from now, the turmoil we're seeing in the aftermath of his murder won't be leveraged to bring hate speech laws to this country. And trust me, if that does happen, there is never a more justified moment for civil disobedience than that, ever. And there never will be. Because if they can tell you what to say, they're telling you what to think. There is nothing they can't do to you because they don't consider you human. They don't believe you have a soul. A human being with a soul, a free man, has a right to say what he believes, not to hurt other people, but to express his views.
Yeah. This is a fight within the MAGA, within the movement who supported Donald Trump. And I don't see that would benefit J.D. Vance and those people who may have in their mind they want to be the next president of the next administration. They want to be part of the next administration in the United States, or Republican Party being able to win the next election.
Well, when they say radical left, it's not the left that you and I maybe grew up with, people who were advocating workers' rights and better pay and safer work environments and so on. I think what the administration is talking about are groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa and things like this. And so they're taking advantage of Charlie Kirk's murder to crack down on these groups. And I think that's in a way understandable, because that's the same way that the US launched the global war on terror. First there was 9/11, and then, in that moment of heightened emotion, then you do what you wanted to do, and then you justify it to people who are thirsting for accountability and for revenge. And so they come up, it's the far left, it's the extreme left. I'm not sure what to think about that, because there's part of that is legitimate, because groups like Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and a lot of these other groups, including, I was shocked to find out that there was a thing called Queers with Arms of Tahoe or something like this. Armed Queers of Nevada. I forget the name, but I thought, like, what? I mean, but anyway, these groups were formed, and they were funded and organized in order to sow chaos in the United States. And so you need to deal with that, because you don't want to have, again, burnt cities, and you don't want to have chaos, and you don't want to have gangs of violent thugs running down neighborhoods around the United States and destroying property and killing people. But taking advantage of a youth movement leader's death to do that it's a little bit cynical. So it doesn't smell right.
Actually, as you've mentioned, there is a lot to be learned for the case of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, because I don't know if you saw the video on X. There is a guy who's trying to dismantle the rifle, and it takes more than 50 minutes to dismantle, and after that you're not capable to put it in a backpack, and it's much longer than a backpack, and you're not going to be able to put it in your pants. It's somehow, there is a lot to be learned on this case, and we are not hearing the reality of what really has happened. And these people are trying to criticize it. I think what Tucker Carlson is talking about, we have a right to criticize what's going on. Why you cannot be honest with us in the way that you're investigating? You have to inform the people, the public opinion, what has happened, what he's talking about.
Well, something extremely interesting emerged from this case, and it was thanks to the reporting by Max Blumenthal and Anya Parampil on Grey Zone. And one of the things that Max Blumenthal suggested, which I thought was extremely interesting, is that his contacts in the administration, in the White House, are telling him, and not just one, but several. One of them is like a high-level official in Trump's administration. They're saying that they're not getting transparency out of the FBI, that FBI is kind of holding back information. They're not providing the footage that they wanted to see, and so forth. So I think that this is also turning out into a test of loyalty in the administration, because even if we suppose that Trump is for real, that he's not controlled opposition, that he really wants to change course of the United States government and their policies, his ability to deliver depends on other members of his administration being loyal and staying on the agenda. And then if he has very high level officials in his administration that are not loyal, that are actually doing things to undermine him and to destroy his credibility, then that's a huge problem, especially if it's again the FBI, because who's the head of the FBI? Kash Patel. Kash Patel would be extremely important to the Trump administration. Kash Patel has also avowed his undying loyalty to the state of Israel, which is strange. And then that takes us back to Benjamin Netanyahu. And so is it now the case that the FBI is covering for Israel. That's an important angle, but you can see how at this stage you could actually get hurt if you look in the right place and if you ask the right questions.
Yeah. Alex, the situation in the Middle East is changing, and it's changing drastically when it comes to the summit. And all these countries came together to condemn the Israeli attack on Doha. But looking at Iran, Syria, all these actors in the Middle East together going to Doha, it's somehow a clear message to the West, to basically to the government in Israel, that they're uniting the Middle East. They're making Middle East, they're changing the face of Middle East, let's put it this way, as they claim that that is the case. But is not for the benefit of Israel, is for the benefit of unity of those countries who are suffering from these sort of policies of chaos in the Middle East. What's your understanding of that? Because we've learned Iran and Saudi Arabia are getting closer economically and in terms of security. We had Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, expanding their, some sort of partnership, NATO-like partnership, which somehow was of concern for India. India came out and said, what is that? But I don't see that has anything to do with India. It has everything to do with Israel, because both of these countries are the target and one of the most, vulnerable targets of Israel. You're taking that.
Well, it shows again one of these cases where you can be penny wise and dollar stupid. And so, I'm talking about the Israelis, because they feel that they're very clever and very capable, that, they have all this intelligence and they have all these ways of spying, and they can find accurately who is. And so they can kill them. So they do, because they can. And then they climb up and celebrate and only reinforce their own idea about how clever they are and how invincible they are, not thinking through the consequences, that they are uniting their enemies. And pretty much everybody is their enemy at this stage. I mean, even China is their enemy. I think that the going to summit in Doha, I think it was beyond sad, because it came up with a communique, with a declaration that strongly condemns the actions of Israel, but no action whatsoever, nothing. So obviously no military action, which in a way you can almost understand, because they can't do anything without support from the United States and the UK. But then, they could have, as a token, maybe expelled Israeli ambassadors and consuls from their, the diplomatic staff from their government, from their countries. They didn't do that either. So it's just a piece of paper until people forget, and then it's going back to business as usual. Nothing's going to happen. There's going to be no accountability. But the real things that happened that you mentioned is indeed that the Saudis are growing closer to Iran, and that the Saudis and the Pakistanis signed a mutual defense pact, a military alliance, in fact. And Pakistan is a nuclear force, and they have expressed willingness to use nuclear weapons against Israel if Israel uses nuclear weapons against Iran, for example. And this is necessary because I think that everybody in the region there sees that they're next, that what happened in Qatar, what happened in Yemen, what happened in Iran, they can happen to any of them any day. And I hope that it will cause a rethink for the Saudis of their role in Lebanon, where they're heavily lobbying and putting pressure on the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah. Because if they disarmed Hezbollah, then the Lebanese would be treated like the Palestinians in Gaza and like the Palestinians in the West Bank. And when they take care of the Palestinians, they would take care of the Lebanese, and then they would be taking care of the Saudis next, and so forth, to create wasteland everywhere. And then we know that, they themselves said, well, when we're done with Iranians, then we're going to go for the Pakistanis. There's no end to it. This is a state of criminal paranoia, and there's no cure.
Actually, the Israeli Minister of Diaspora Affairs, he said that the new axis of evil is Turkey, Syria, and Qatar.
Yeah. Well, we already knew about Turkey. Turkey has been upgraded to enemy number one already a few months ago. Leaving Iran behind. But now they added Qatar, which is extremely interesting. Even though I'm not even sure that we know exactly what happened in Qatar. I mean, we know that they tried to kill the Hamas negotiating team, but who was behind it? I mean, at this stage, I have to say I'm a little bit annoyed that everybody's constantly going Trump, Trump, Trump. It's like a fashionable knee-jerk reaction to blame absolutely everything under the sun on Trump. And then all other factors are ignored. Like we just learned a few days ago from Colonel Douglas McGregor that Qataris must have known about the incoming missiles and aircraft, because they bought all this technology from the West. They spent billions on it to be able to monitor the skies. And so what he said, based on his contacts, who were people who sold and helped operationalize all this equipment, that there is absolutely no way that Qataris wouldn't have known. But regardless, Trump, Trump, Trump. So that element is not even considered because it's all Trump's fault. And then we also know that there was a British surveillance aircraft circling Doha for a few hours at the time of the strike. And still, nobody mentions it. It's like it didn't happen. It's all Trump, 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 the United States, the United States, the United States. And everybody's treating the United States like it's a monolith, and that everybody does exactly as Trump tells them. So therefore, Trump made all this happen. I mean, it's possible that he did, but it is also possible that he didn't. I don't know which one is worse, because if he did, it's horrible. If he didn't, it's possibly worse, because it suggests that he doesn't have control of his deep state and that they're doing whatever the hell they want. And this one would be so brazen that, because, picture the scene. I didn't order the strikes, but the strikes happen. And they're making me look extremely bad. Who did it? Obviously, you would conduct an investigation and you'd be firing people, a lot of them. But what if they're saying, yeah, we did it. What are you going to do about this, mofo? You don't hold the cards. So I don't know which possibility is worse, but what I would suggest is that people need to back away from the Trump tree to try to see the layout of the forest, because there are other trees there. There's the British, who have an extremely close military and intelligence cooperation with the Qataris. There's also the Qataris, who should have known that Israeli aircraft was coming in. I'm not suggesting that the Emir of Qatar was behind it, but maybe there's also Qatari deep state that might have done it in cahoots with the British intelligence, with the renegade bits of the CIA and other intelligence agencies, and that they just did it. And then another thing that emerged from the Charlie Kirk case from Max Blumenthal again is that Trump is apparently very afraid of Benjamin Netanyahu. And this is something I've been making a case forever now, because everybody was also suggesting, oh, Trump loves Benjamin Netanyahu. Oh, he's his best friend and a role model, and he admires him, and so on and so forth. I see no evidence for that. I see a lot more evidence that Trump actually hates Benjamin Netanyahu and that the sentiment is mutual. But, that sentiment might also explain this case, that rather than saying this was a joint operation between the Israelis, the British, and possibly renegade elements of our intelligence and military, to first try to own the strike and then to say, no, we had nothing to do with it. It's never going to happen again. And then immediately Benjamin Netanyahu comes out and says, like, we're going to do it again if we want to. So that, whatever the case is, Trump involved and Trump not involved, it looks very bad for him.
Yeah. I don't know what it seems, Alex, what's going on in the mind of the leaders in these Arab states. They're so afraid, they're so frightened by what has happened. They don't know if Netanyahu would attack tomorrow, would attack Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, on one of these countries and kill, I don't know, whoever they want to kill. They don't feel secure right now. That's why there's some sort of panic in the Middle East, Alex.
I think, Nima, that they feel powerless, and not necessarily because they, it's not to do with them fearing that they might be killed. Is that they can do nothing, because if they try, okay, so they've been put into this petrodollar system, selling their oil for dollars, and most of these dollars had ended up in London in the petrodollar monetary system, which is outside of the United States, and in the Federal Reserve banks in New York, in the United States. And so that's who controls their money. And if they even thought about striking at Israel, or calling for a united front against Israel, or sanctioning Israel, or any such thing, they could very easily be sanctioned. They could very easily be cut off from their funds. And then, what happens? You can't pay your military their salaries, you can't pay your pensions, you can't support the healthcare and education in your countries. And then you have a social problem and the possible social uprising in your country, which I guarantee you is already being prepared. The Western intelligence agencies are already preparing the social uprisings in any country that dared get uppity and push back against the Western Empire and their lapdog, their attack dog, Israel. So until they free themselves from the Western financial system, they are very, very stuck. Because if they did anything at all to fight back, they would be destroyed. They would be destroyed immediately, like Iran was in 1953, and then again in 1979. Because the first thing that, BP did, they got monopoly practically over all the oil being purchased from Iran. And they were guaranteeing purchases of 5 million barrels a day from Iran. And then when they got unhappy with the Shah because he was developing Iranian nuclear program, and they wanted him to stop, in cooperation with French and German companies, they wanted him to stop, and he said, no, this is, we need a nuclear program. Then BP stopped buying Iranian oil. They started buying less than $3 million a day. So suddenly, the Shah's government found itself in a huge distress, money-wise. And they already had CIA and MI6 people organizing a social uprising, and they already had Ayatollah Khomeini prepared to take over. That's what happened in 1979. And this could happen to the Saudis. This can happen to the Qataris, to all of these Middle Eastern kingdoms. So they're extremely, extremely vulnerable to all this. They have made themselves vulnerable because they made the deal with the devil back in the 50s and earlier in the case of Saudi Arabia. And now, to use the vulgar expression, their balls are in the hands of New York, Wall Street, and London. And the only way for them to fight back is to diversify their oil sales to China and other countries, to embrace the BRICS movement and to embrace the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to improve their security. And then they can start pushing back and saying no to the West. But this is what's going to happen inevitably. And this is, again, that, penny wise, dollar stupid approach by Israel, because, it's like they have a hammer in their hand and every single problem in the world looks like a nail and they're hammering away. But there's always a reaction, and the reaction, we're seeing it now. And it's very, very obvious to all these governments. We have to urgently distance ourselves from the West, disentangle from all these entanglements, and we have to join the China bloc, the China, Russia, Iran bloc.
Alex, I think what you've mentioned about Iran is somehow can be applied to the case of the Saudi Arabia and these kingdoms, because during the Shah in Iran, the system was so much dependent on the United States, military system, security system, so much dependent on the United States. What has happened in the aftermath of Shah? The new government, the revolution came in and they changed everything. Today you don't see any sort of dependence on any other country. You can talk about allies, partners, but they're not dependent on other countries to provide with the security, with the arms, with whatever that would be. That was one of the main problem with the Shah system, with the system they had during those days. And it seems that's the case still for the Arab states. They're so much dependent on the United States in terms of the security. You mentioned these equipment that they can use to monitor what's going on with the attacks, but they're not capable, Alex. Everything is run by by foreigners. This is the problem in the Arab countries. We had the same case in Iran before. We know what Iran was, a huge country, and it always was bigger than these Arab states, and the population is bigger, the situation, the territory is somehow gigantic. But you see with the case of Saudi Arabia, UAE, these are little tiny states that they can easily be manipulated from within.
Yeah, correct. And this is another reason why the action of the American government and of the Israelis, and I have to always say the British, because the British get the pass. Nobody talks about them, but let's call it Americans, British, and the Israelis. Their action is pushing everybody away from them. And, maybe 50 years ago, there was no alternative. You had the Soviet bloc. China was weak. India was weak. Everybody was weak. So there was no alternative. Today, there is an alternative. And China and Russia are now militarily probably more powerful in this region, in the Eurasian region than the Western powers. And so, again, they're going for unintended consequences and opposite outcomes. And when you mention this equipment, I think you're right. There's, these are very sophisticated, expensive pieces of equipment, and I suppose it's very possible that they are networked back to the mothership, and that the mothership might be able to say, okay, this particular attack, you don't see it. I don't know about that equipment, but I know about software development, and I know that would be relatively straightforward to do, to say this particular kind of attack, if we are attacking, make sure that our equipment doesn't see it, that it comes as a surprise and it's not detected. So that's also a possibility, obviously. Yeah.
Alex, isn't that amazing that Netanyahu, here is what he said in Hebrew, and many people may not hear that he's linking Qatar and China. They're pouring vast sums of he says that they're spreading disinformation, misinformation about, they're why is he talking about China? This is interesting to me. Is he feeling that China is the new, the new, how can I say that, the new sort of thing that could resonate more with the establishment in the United States? That's why he's talking this way. Or he's sending some sort of message to those people in the Middle East, in China, in Russia. What is that message, in your opinion? Why do they need to talk about China? Because after all, when we talk about China, everybody would understand that they can benefit from China if they would be a rational player in dealing with China.
Well, directly, China is supplying weapons to Egypt and to Iran. So obviously, it could be a threat to Israel, or if it's not a threat, it limits their maneuvering space. They can't they can't fly into Egypt or into Iran and expect to be able to get away with it unharmed. So that's the direct impact. But I think more importantly, Israel is grasping for relevance, and I think that he's trying to latch himself onto this part of the Cold War crew in the West that sees China as their main adversary, which is pretty much everybody in this Cold War cohort. The Cold Warriors who still see the world as two blocks, and you have to destroy the other block to be free, and you have to keep the warfare going nonstop. So I think that the plan was, first let's destroy Russia, and then we're going to turn Russia into Ukraine and use it against China, and that's not working out. So some people think that, we're going to just have to take on China directly by ourselves. And they've been trying to corral, Japan and Singapore and Australia and the Philippines and everybody in that region, the so-called allies in the Pacific, to come together and go and kill China for them. But there's not very much interest. So, it seems to me that Benjamin Netanyahu wants to make himself useful in that respect, and to show that, Israel, being super, super clever and technologically advanced and all this can help in that respect. It's only on the completely wrong end of the Eurasian landmass. So if you wanted to use Israel as a beachhead, I don't see how that would be useful. But I think that Benjamin Netanyahu is now desperate enough that he would take on anybody that the West sees as their adversaries, to make himself relevant and useful, and to draw attention to himself, and to keep getting supplies of weapons, supplies of money, support, and so forth.
Yeah, Steve Bannon believes that they're still pushing for the regime change in Iran. He's mentioned that on his program. And
that who is pushing for regime change in Iran?
Yeah, the people. Here is what he said. Let's put it.
Got Rubio's in the middle in Israel right now, and trust me, my sources are impeccable. They're still pushing regime change in Iran. Yep. Don't think you added this one by a long shot.
Yeah. Rubio went to Israel to somehow, in my opinion, to show the support of the United States, because with the case of the summit in the Middle East, they wanted to help to somehow balance the atmosphere of the region. They went to Israel to show the support. But what Bannon is talking about, there still the mindset is the regime change.
The regime change has always been the objective, and it continues to be the objective, because the logic of empire is that everybody has to submit themselves to the diktat of the empire, because only then can you come in and command all the resources of that country. If there's a country that says no, the resources of this country belong to the people of this country, and you may not command them for your own purposes, then they have to, they have to change that regime and bring in somebody who will do as they say. That's what they want to do, and this is an objective which is politically difficult to sell in the West, because we're democracies, and we're fighting around the world to spread democracy and human rights and free speech and all of those wonderful things. So they have to use Iran's nuclear program as a justification. So, we have to, Iranian mullahs, these fanatics, they're terrible people. They can't have a nuclear program, because then they're going to make a bomb, and then it's the end of the world. They're just going to bomb everybody. So they're creating a scarecrow in order to justify going to war against Iran. So the need for regime change is not going to go away at all. And that's very obvious from what Israelis are saying, but it's also quite obvious in what is being said out of the British governing circles. They're obsessed with changing the regime in Ukraine. In Iran. Was I saying Ukraine just now?
In Iran.
Okay, yeah, Iran. Sorry. Sometimes, I catch myself going through a whole argument, and I'm saying Iran when I meant to say Israel, and Israel when I meant to say Iran, and I think oh my God, the whole thing is not just upside down exactly.
You know what? It's so amazing to me that they don't understand what's going on in Iran, Alex. With the Shah, we had the senior and the junior. The senior was removed from power in Iran because they replaced him by his son, and his son came out before leaving Iran. He said, "They don't want me." Who are those people? He was talking about British and the United States. They don't want me.
Correct.
Because his father was removed. He was replaced by the foreign governments. That's why he wasn't that much confident about his position. You don't see that in Iran anymore. These people don't care about what the United States is thinking of, what the British government is thinking of. They're doing whatever they want to do. That's the difference. And I don't see a regime change would work for them.
Yeah, I think that now it will be very difficult to regime change Iran, because they're prepared for it. They even got caught dozing off behind the wheel this summer. But I think that now they are at maximum alert, and they're ready for it, and they took contingency measures to prevent it from happening. But the obsession of the Western Empire is and will continue to be regime change in Iran, and then regime change in Russia, and the regime change in Pakistan and in China and everywhere, because what they want is the unipolar global order, the rules-based global order, where they set the rules and everybody else plays by those rules. That's the whole point. That's why they call it the rules-based global order, not the international law-based global order. They just never tell us what the rules are. But if a country there says, no, thank you very much, we have our own rules, and we don't need yours, well, then they have to be taken down. And the logic of empire is that nobody may challenge them, and then you have to go to war to change the regimes, which is why we have the wars in the Middle East, and which is why we have the war in Ukraine, because Vladimir Putin also said, no, thank you, we will do with our own rules. but that, that will not go away, because that is in the logic of the rule of this empire. And it will continue this way until the empire finally falls, which I hope won't be too long.
Alex, here is what the president of Ireland said about the position of Europe in what's going on in Gaza.
That the European Union will find it extraordinarily difficult to ever be a union in any sense again, when some of its strongest members are deciding to stay silent in watching emaciated children in what is a human, man-made, really atrocious infliction on people.
Yeah. There are many people, they're not happy with the situation in Gaza, but they don't see the European leaders doing anything about it, but just talking and warning, nothing else.
The European leaders are very, very late into this game, and I think that they're only responding in the minimal way to public pressures. So, if the public weren't up in arms and protesting and making their voices heard, I think that the policymakers, Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas and Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer and all of these people, they would be perfectly happy to not even do anything at all. And, they're not just being silent. They're accomplices in this genocide. They're providing help. They're providing ammunitions, weapons, intelligence support, spare parts, everything that Israel needs to execute this genocide. The Western powers are delivering. And again, everybody's saying Trump, 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 but it's not just Trump. It's not just the United States. It's Germany. It's Britain. Remember, Britain got caught flying surveillance aircraft over Gaza almost every day, providing real-time data to the IDF so they could better target people in Gaza. And as a result, we have how many dead civilians? I don't even know, but it's, the official count is a fraction of what's real, and the real estimates vary from 400,000 to 680,000 dead Gazans. It's absolutely atrocious, but that's the reality of these extremely low caliber leaders that are installed not really by popular vote, but they're nominated by higher powers. And then if you look into who they are, they're all very close to the banking cartel. Friedrich Merz of BlackRock, Emmanuel Macron of the Rothschild Bank, Keir Starmer, who is the stupid minion of Tony Blair, who is the knight companion of the most noble order of the Garter from the City of London. So Tony Blair is the City of London, and Keir Starmer is just his sock puppet.
Alex, we had Donald Trump's visit to the United Kingdom, and here is what King Charles said at the meeting they had.
Have the closest defense, security, and intelligence relationship ever known. In 2 world wars, we fought together to defeat the forces of tyranny. Today, as tyranny once again threatens Europe, we and our allies stand together in support of Ukraine to deter aggression and secure peace.
It's somehow amazing they don't mention what Russia did.
They also don't mention that the British orchestrated both of those wars, which we know today. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's on record. We know that to be the case. King Charles forgets to mention that. And then, it seems to me that the whole British establishment was so much love for the 19th century to come back, where they are the only game in town and everybody defers to them and they run the world. Now they have to somehow seduce Donald Trump to come back on board, to be their daddy, and to turn their game in their favor. But, Donald Trump just cut off the Five Eyes intelligence. He was saying, the closest intelligence cooperation in the history of the universe. Yes, but Trump just cut you off from providing information on America's, the United States cooperation and discussions with Russia. So those are now off limits to the British, Canadian, Australian, and New Zealand intelligence agencies. And the American military officers were just invited and accept the invitation to Belarus to participate, to observe military games there with Belarus and Russia. And so that cooperation is growing, is becoming more and more significant. And it seems to me that the British establishment and their European allies are in a state of panic.
Yeah. Here is what Politico reported, that Poland has decided to keep its border closed indefinitely, even though military drills in Belarus they have ended. And what they're trying to do is this, in this article, shows that this effectively blocks the major trade artery worth 25 billion euros annually between China and the EU. But China has an alternative to that.
Yes, it will. It will delay shipments of certain goods that are coming from China, which can come by air, which is a lot more expensive, or which can come by ship, which takes a lot more time. But it's again an example of being penny wise and dollar stupid, because it will obviously create alternatives. And this is again a case of a British minion antagonizing China, because the negotiations were conducted with Radoslaw Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister, and they went back and forth for 3 hours, and Sikorski said, nope, it's going to stay blocked. There's no reason for it other than to antagonize China. But, we have to remember who Radoslaw Sikorski is. He is a former British subject. He changed back to Polish citizenship before he was sent back to take over the foreign ministry in Poland. He was a member of the very, very extremely exclusive Bullingdon Club in London, where he was induced by his best friend Boris Johnson. And other members of that club are Nathan Rothschild, David Cameron, and was the finance guy, David Cameron's finance minister, George Osborne, among others. But you can't get into that club other than by invitation, and it was Boris Johnson who brought Sikorski there by invitation. And then when he was sent back to Poland, his political career just took off like a rocket. He's been foreign minister, defense minister, or interior minister, just on a revolving door, and then member of parliament in Europe on a revolving door basis. And he was actually caught on a recording talking to another Polish politician, and he didn't mention China in this, but he pretty much said that our job as Poland, is to antagonize both Russia and Germany, which fits perfectly in with British geopolitics, the balance of power geopolitics, but is actually very bad for the interests of the Polish people in Poland. Same thing with this one. Now they're antagonizing China where they can, again, against the interests of the Polish people. But I think that, it's only going to be a matter of time before these people are swept from power. And if it can be done democratically, it will be done otherwise in the end.
Alex, just to wrap up this session, do you feel that what European countries, or I'm talking not European, all of them, but what the United Kingdom, France, and Germany are trying to do in Ukraine is the same as the Idlib in Syria, what they created in Idlib, because the only option on the table for them that remain on the table is the Idlib. I don't see, and how do you see Russia responding to that? Because Russia has the experience of Idlib. They know what has happened exactly in Idlib, and they know how to deal with it. They've learned a lot from that case.
Yes, and it's obvious who is behind it, because while the Turks are managing the logistics on the ground, the strategy and preparation is being done by the British intelligence. So they have been coddling and incubating HTS from Al Qaeda and Al Nusra and all of these fronts. And then they are now practically the most present force in Syria, in Damascus. And they are also, Vanessa Bili told me that Gaziantep in Turkey, which is there not far from Idlib, is pretty much MI6 central. It's crawling with British officials. And so obviously the Russians understand this, and I think that it's going to necessitate that Russians take control of the whole of the Black Sea, because what the British want is to keep control of Odessa, because they need ports. They need control of ports and airports, because that's how you get the drugs in. That's how you got the weapons, explosives, drones, everything else in, and the fighters. And one of the British specialties over the, I wish the city of London wasn't such a sausage, because every time I say the British, I think like it's almost unfair to the British people, because it has nothing to do with them. This is the city of London, but city of London Empire doesn't sound right. But anyway, that establishment. One of their traditional ways of undermining and destroying countries is through opium wars. And, that's their specialty. I believe that they're still doing it. And they will do it to Russia if they can. And so being able to have Ukraine there, access to Ukraine by sea and by air, and then being able to send Ukrainians into Russia, or use the Ukrainians that are already in Russia, which are, I think, 5 or 6 million, they're almost indistinguishable from the Russians. To me, they are indistinguishable. The Russian people will tell you, no, we can tell who's Ukrainian. But I don't know, Then you can spread out a big network of saboteurs. You can put together terror units. You can put together drug trafficking networks and so forth, but you need to be able to have that beachhead again, like they did with Israel in the Middle East, like they did with Idlib against Syria, and so they would like to create something similar in Ukraine in order to serve that same purpose. But something that, again, from Colonel Douglas McGregor that I heard from his contacts, which I don't know if it's true or not, but it seems that they are creating something even more similar to Israel in Ukraine that we know, that they're creating exclusive Jewish areas, and that there's an appearance of certain, like some kind of a private police that will not allow anyone in that area if they're not Jewish. So it seems to me that we have the Zionist scenario, but in a different geography. Because when they were creating Israel, the Round Table Group that was set up around Alfred Milner and Rhodes was before, but then Nathan Rothschild was part of it, and some other people. What they were saying is that in order for Britain to remain a maritime empire, that it would be necessary to cede Palestine with a particularly patriotic stock. And maybe the part of the problem is that normally, in let's say in normal peace conditions, Ukrainians don't really have a hatred of Russians, and vice versa. That kind of hatred doesn't exist. So maybe they decided we need to introduce a different stock here. And now apparently the same thing that started happening in the 30s and in the 40s in Palestine seems to be happening in Ukraine. And it worked once. They might try it again.
I think the key is Odessa, Alex. The key is
Yes. Correct.
That's the future. If Russia wants to have the leverage on the western part of Ukraine in the aftermath of any settlement in Ukraine, Odessa and somehow Nikolaev are the key to that.
Yes, correct.
Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us today. Great pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Nima, take care. Thank you for the invite, and until the next time.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.